Hi guys, Forgotten Wolf here, and this is Game of Thrones Houses Season 2! We are back for Season 2. I'm so excited. It's the start of a new 6-episode season, and I'll start with one of the last great two houses that I didn't cover last time. And this is the Tyrells, as you can tell by the thumbnail and title. And with that out of the way, let's begin. Unlike most of the great houses, the Tyrells didn't start as kings. They started as stewards to the gardeners who were kings of the Reach. However, during Aegon's conquest on the Field of Fire, Aegon and his sister wives burned the last male of House Gardner, meaning House Gardner was extinct. Aegon wrote to Highgarden to secure it and take it, and Harlan Tyrell, the lead steward of Highgarden, surrendered the castle. As a side note, how the fuck did a steward have the authority to surrender it, not a master-at-arms or a castellan, like in the books? That's very questionable. Aegon the Conqueror, when he became king, rewarded Harlan Tyrell for his actions of surrendering the castle. His house, House Tyrell, was granted Highgarden, becoming Lords of Highgarden and Lord Paramount of the Reach and Wardens of the South. And Harlan Tyrell, although not the founder, he is the one who got them to be lords, so I'm technically counting him as the founder. And the Tyrells now had full control over the Reach, with them being Lord Paramount of the Reach. After Aegon's conquest, the First Dornish War came, and Harlan Tyrell fought in the war. However, he went missing during the war, presumably killed by the Martells, and they never returned his body. This meant that Theo Tyrell was now Lord of Highgarden. And the Tyrells would enjoy the peace the whole realm enjoyed under King Jaehaerys, but the Tyrells were relatively weak, and they were unable to control their bannermen, in particular the Hightowers. The Hightowers' actions would disrupt this peace and start the Dance of the Dragons. Spoilers for House of the Dragon ahead. The Tyrells wouldn't do much, as the current Lord of Highgarden and head of House Tyrell was Lord Lionel Tyrell, who was just an infant, so his mother was ruling, much like the Vale. Rather than rock boat, the Tyrells followed the Hightowers into war against the Targaryen Blacks in Rhaenyra. Although technically the Tyrells were Lord Paramount of the Reach, it was really the Hightowers who would hold that role, as they dominated the Reach politics. But the Tyrells would once again fail to control their bannermen after the death of Lord Beesbury and the Small Council usurping Rhaenyra for Aegon, and House Beesbury took up arms for Rhaenyra, and in the last season of House of the Dragon, it looks like they captured Otto Hightower. However, during the Dance of the Dragons, House Tyrell would almost be stripped of Highgarden, as the dragon seed rider Ulf White tried to claim Highgarden for himself, but since the Tyrells weren't strong enough to control their bannermen or really take part in the war, the Tyrells were never stripped of their castles, and Ulf White never gained it, meaning that the Tyrells kept it. And after the Dance of the Dragons, the Tyrells were better able to keep their bannermen in control and fulfill their roles as Lord of the Paramount of the Reach. The Tyrells once again enjoyed peace and were loyal servants of House Targaryen for generations, and when called upon in Dorne, Lord Lionel Tyrell answered the call and led the army, but he eventually died in Dorne, the second Tyrell to go to Dorne and die. They really don't learn their lesson, do they? Spoilers for Night of the Seven Kingdoms ahead. In the tourney of Ashford, Leo Tyrell had ascended to the title of Lord of Highgarden, Lord Paramount of the Reach, and he participated in the tourney at Ashford, but he didn't fight Sir Duncan the Tall because Duncan and his squire Egg were smart enough to realize that Leo Tyrell was too good. Afterwards, the Tyrells loyally served the Targaryens until the very end of the Targaryen regime, when Robert's rebellion broke out. The Tyrells stayed loyal to King Aerys, and the Reach forces were under the command of Randyll Tarly and Mace Tyrell. And Randyll Tarly defeated Robert Baratheon at the Battle of Ashford, which allowed Lord Mace Tyrell and head of House Tyrell to lay siege to Storm's End on the land side, while the Red Wine Fleet laid siege to Storm's End on the seaside, where he stayed the whole war, unable to take the castle from Stannis Baratheon, something Stannis would not forget. However, after the sack of King's Landing, go watch my video on that now, The Tyrells realized this, and they left Storm's End in order to bend the knee to King Robert Baratheon, acknowledging him as King of the Seven Kingdoms. And after the war, the Tyrells would enjoy 17 years of peace under Robert, but they didn't participate in Greyjoy's rebellions, for those wondering. Yeah, 17 years of peace under Robert, leading to the Game of Thrones show. At the start of the show, this is how the Tyrell family looked like. Mace Tyrell was still Lord of Highgarden, and his mother, Olenna Tyrell, was still around. However, Mace's father and wife were both dead. However, Mace did have two children, Margaery Tyrell and Loras Tyrell, and Loras spent most of his time in King's Landing with Renly Baratheon, and after the Hands Tourney, which Loras won, Loras told Renly that if he made a claim to the throne after Robert's death, the Tyrells would support him. This tells us that we know Stannis knew the truth, but we don't know about Renly, but this implies that Renly knew the truth about Joffrey, but now I'm getting sidetracked. Robert Baratheon died in a hunting accident which Queen Cersei arranged for, and along with the imprisonment and execution of Ned Stark, this sparked the War of the Five Kings. The Tyrells supported Renly Baratheon as Renly was crowned King of the Seven Kingdoms in Highgarden, as Renly married Margaery Tyrell to get the Tyrell support, and Loras would command Renly's armies. As a side note, why did Renly think he should be king over Stannis? However, Stannis Baratheon would lay siege to Storm's End, Renly's seat of power, while Catelyn Stark was treating with Renly, and they had come to an agreement where the Starks would support Renly for king so as Robb Stark's seat as king in the north. But this would never happen, as Stannis decided to use a shadow baby to kill Renly and take his men, and the blame was shifted onto Brienne of Tarth. But Renly was dead, and although Loras wanted to still march on Stannis and avenge Renly, Margaery Tyrell convinced her brother to take the army back to Highgarden before Stannis took them both captive. The Tyrells returned home where they had Littlefinger from the Small Council waiting for them. And Littlefinger, of course, supports the Lannisters, for those wondering, and Littlefinger arranged for the Tyrells to join the war on the Lannisters' side in exchange for Joffrey to put Sansa Stark aside in order to marry Margaery Tyrell, making Margaery queen. This all culminated in the Battle of Blackwater Bay, where King's Landing's defenses were about to fall to Stannis in the city, but at the last second, the Lannister and Tyrell forces came in and defeated Stannis at the Battle of Blackwater Bay. Then Joffrey agreed to put Sansa Stark aside in order to marry Margaery Tyrell. In the last year of the war, 300 AC, Robb Stark was looking weak, and the Tyrells were planning to take control of the north by wedding Loras to Sansa Stark. But that would only happen after Margaery's wedding to Joffrey. But this never happened, as Larsa's squire told Littlefinger, who in turn told Tywin and Cersei about the Tyrells' plot, and Sansa Stark was married to Tyrion Lannister, while Loras was promised to Cersei Lannister. However, at the end of the year, Robb Stark was killed at the Red Wedding, and the War of the Five Kings was over. And in 301 AC, Joffrey and Margaery would be wed. Joffrey and Margaery would briefly be married, but at the wedding feast, Joffrey was poisoned by Littlefinger and Olenna Tyrell for two reasons. One, to get Sansa Stark out of King's Landing and free to marry, knowing Cersei would get Tyrion blamed and executed, and two, to have Margaery marry Tommen, who she would be able to better control. Joffrey died at the Purple Wedding, and Tyrion was blamed, but after his trial by combat went against him, Jaime Lannister freed Tyrion, who in turn killed Tywin, who sentenced him to death despite knowing that Tyrion didn't kill Joffrey. This was great for the Tyrells, as it meant that Loras didn't need to marry Cersei, as Cersei had no interest in being married again, and now a major influence over King's Landing was gone and dead. And with Tywin dead, the next two seasons/years would be a battle for influence over King's Landing and Tommen. Margaery would finally become Queen of the Seven Kingdoms in 302 AC when she married Tommen Baratheon, the third king she's married now. I don't even know anymore. Margaery would fight against Cersei for control over him at King's Landing, and this would carry on until Cersei decided to let the Faith Militant rise again, Like, that was a good idea, with the agreement that Margaery and Loras would be imprisoned. And this would happen. Cersei then sent Mace Tyrell to treat with the Iron Bank so that the Tyrell kids weren't freed, and it was just Olenna Tyrell who remained. Cersei, however, was imprisoned herself by the High Sparrow for charges of basically incest and sleeping with other men. And Kevin Lannister took over the Small Council, dismissing Mace Tyrell and adding Olenna to the Small Council. Eventually, Cersei and Margaery would be freed while Loras remained in his prison cell until 303 AC. Margaery would get Olenna to go home, letting her deal with Cersei, who's also due to stand trial along with Loras. Eventually, the trial came and Loras joined the Faith Militant, and immediately, Margaery and Mace's priorities became to get Loras out of the Faith Militant, but this would never happen, as when Cersei's trial started, Cersei rigged the whole sept to blow up, killing Mace, Margaery, and Loras Tyrell, meaning that House Tyrell would eventually go extinct after Olenna died. Afterwards, Cersei became Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and Olenna Tyrell would pledge a divided reach to Daenerys Targaryen. The Tyrells were now extremely weak, and half the lords of the Reach would follow Randall Tarly as he supported Cersei Lannister, as Lannister promised Randall Tarly Highgarden. Cersei would command Jaime Lannister to take Highgarden and use their gold to pay off the Iron Bank and buy mercenaries. Jaime did this by faking a march to defend Castle Rock, and which Grey One was going to take it, and Tyrion, who was now handed the queen to Daenerys Targaryen, thought that Castle Rock would eliminate the gold supply and make Cersei look weak. However, Castle Rock was worth no gold, and the last mine ran dry in 298 EC 6 years ago, which now explains why Jaime marched on Highgarden, taking it, and killed Olenna Tyrell, who finally confessed to Joffrey's murder. What a badass way to go out. Anyway, House Tyrell was gone, and gone for good this time, and would never come back. That is it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. In the next episode, I will do the last great house, the Tullys, the Lords of River Run. And if you want more like this at 100k views, I'll do a video on the life of Tywin Lannister. And at 1k likes, I'll do a video on the life of Robert Baratheon. But until then, bye!